And we're live. Hi, everyone. Today we have a special topic to discuss Binding the Bards bookbinding competition, a brand new competition launched at Durham University. And two our guests are book conservators who will talk to us about this competition. And yeah, that's the general idea. We have Tony King and Lauren Moon-Schott, and we're live with us. Hi everyone, and I have sound in the
Today
background.
we
Sorry,
have
I'll have to fix
a
it. Special topic to discuss.
nothing on our
Nothing on
side.
your side. Okay, perfect. On my side. Anyway, hi, Lauren. Hi, Tony. Nice to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yes, nice to be here.
So the plan for today is to talk about the competition first, and the technical stuff, the history of the book, of the theme of the competition, and then we'll probably talk about book conservation as well, if we have time. I hope we'll have time. As usual, we'll be glad to see any questions from our viewers. That always helps us, to move forward, and almost always we have some interesting questions. So please don't hesitate to post questions, both on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be checking that and passing the question to our guests. I'm Stepan Chizhov. I'm in Windsor, England. My co-host is Pavel Voronin. He's in Serbia, in Belgrade, and our dear guest, from where are you joining us today?
I'm Lauren Moon-Schott, and I'm at Durham in Northern England.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit further west. I'm in Northumberland, but Lauren and I work together at Durham.
Okay, great. So nice to have you here. We already have Dave Turnbull posting hi from St Andrews, Scotland. Dave is our regular, so we hope Dave will ask some questions as well. We'll see how it goes. And as usual, Dave sort of preempted my my next comment, my next prompt. We always invite our viewers to post from where they are joining, because it's always interesting to see the geography of our viewership. And when we stream in the morning or before noon, usually we have more guests from Asia, Australia, Europe, of course, and it's a bit too early for the US or for South America, but we'll see how it goes. So, what should we start with? Pasha, you had some ideas.
First and foremost, let's talk about First Folio in general, and Durham First Folio in particular, and also who wrote it. Just kidding. First Folio, one of the most expensive books in the world, one of the best preserved in terms of numbers books of that period. Like we have 230 of those or thereabouts, and yet it fetches upwards of $10 million at auctions. Why?
Yeah, why indeed? Yeah, so yeah, you're quite right. There's about 235 surviving copies, we believe. So it's not exactly rare in the world of rare books, yet it is so venerated and so revered as something beyond just another printed book. But yeah, it commands this fascination and extremely high sale prices, as you've alluded to, that we don't see with many other books of this type. So yeah, I mean, extremely important sort of cultural touchstone, I think, certainly in Britain. The earliest surviving, not quite complete works, but collected works of William Shakespeare, printed 1623. And yeah, people are really drawn to it and have been for hundreds of years. And it's been fascinating to look back on attitudes towards first folios. When it was first printed in the 17th century, was it just another book? Clearly, it was a folio-sized book. It was different to a lot of other plays printed at the time. But over the centuries, these books have been revered, venerated. They've been rebound a lot. quite rare to find one in a 17th century binding anymore. They're in beautiful leather and gold and very decorative bindings. They're sometimes stored in quite elaborate situations, almost like they have almost like a religious element to them. We've heard tale of some stored like relics in libraries. So this book has a status that is pretty unique, we think, for a book of this type. And Durham has had a copy for almost 400 years. The Durham First Folio has been at Durham for a very long time. It had a brief trip away from Durham, which we'll touch on later. But yeah, Lauren, do you think that sums up the First Folio?
Yeah, the First Folio in general, I think it might be worth addressing what a folio is in particular. Not everyone uses the same phrases that the rare books world uses to describe book sizes. So Tony was saying that historically plays were printed maybe in a different format than the folio. So plays would have typically been printed in a quarto format, meaning a single leaf of paper would have 4 pages and it would be folded twice to make a book about this size. Whereas the folio is a single leaf of paper that is folded in half once. And so it's the full height of the original leaf casting. The size of a folio implies, the importance of a work. Typically, folios were, at the time in 1623, they were reserved for religious works, works of history, things in Latin that were church or law, important works. And the First Folio, while not the first book that contained plays in folio format, the first would have been Ben Jonson's folio, printed just previous to the First Folio. The William Shakespeare's First Folio is the first one that contained exclusively play works. And so that says a lot about the individuals who are willing to put the money into investing in printing this and what they thought they might be doing with the First Folio when they decided to print it. And then it's probably also worth saying, just addressing Bishop Cousin, who was a bishop up here in Durham. He probably would have bought our copy of the First Folio around when it was printed. And our copy of the First Folio has a shelf mark that shows that he stored it in Peterhouse College, Cambridge, when he was there. It would have stayed there while he went to France in exile, and then he returned and came to Durham and brought the book up with him. And so while the book hasn't remained exclusively in Durham, it has belonged to Bishop Cousin and then the location that Bishop Cousin left his books to. So that's something very unique about this book. It sort of uniquely belongs to the North, uniquely belongs to Durham in particular.
I wanted to reference 2 things you said. On one hand, Tony mentioned how it's interesting to trace reception of the book and its reputation. And you mentioned that your particular copy entered what is now a public collection very early on. When you look at where the First Folios are right now, they are not in UK for the most part. Let's face it, most of them are probably in US, like about certainly over 100 of them. Probably a half of them is in US. And there are also copies in, I don't know, France, Russia, 12 of them in Japan. There's one in Australia, everywhere. How did it get to this point? Did the reputation wane in UK, or did the prices go so high that nobody could afford it outside of the, I don't know, railroad barons?
It's a really interesting question. So yeah, there's definitely kind of a reputational boost to owning a First Folio. It's a really well-known, significant, valuable book. We have heard from people who, I think definitely Australia and New Zealand, copies went with the kind of British ambassador, the person running that part of the world, and these copies were left in Australia and New Zealand almost as cultural, this idea of a cultural touchstone. This is a piece of British culture we're leaving here. I think people did see it like that, and this was 19th century and earlier. Otherwise, they've been traded back and forth. They pop up at auction every now and again. And just this veneration for them has really driven that, I think.
Yeah, and I also think that when a railroad baron starts buying as many as he can get his hands on, there's a little bit of excitement in the rare book world, and other people maybe think that they should probably get their hands on it as well. So there's, there's the general popularity of Shakespeare. I don't think he's ever really gone out of popularity, and his popularity really rose to the fore in the Victorian era. There was sort of a Shakespeare mania, but then collecting specifically that book really gained popularity when Folger started collecting, 82 copies of it? 82 copies, I think?
Yeah.
So that's, highest concentration in Washington, D.C.
So why buy one when you can buy 81?
I just had the chance to bring two of our American cousins to Oxford a month ago or so. And so, of course, we went for a tour of Bodleian Library, and they described their first folio's adventures, and how they at some moment librarians decided that first folio is not in so good condition, that they have a second folio in much better condition, so they can sell the first folio. And then sometime later they understood that it was a problematic decision in the first place. So
but again, that shows us how attitudes changed, doesn't it? Because the second folio came out, this is clearly an improved version, why do we need the first folio anymore? And then later on the realization, hang on, that first folio was really significant, we needed that one back. It's fascinating to look at how this book has been received over the years.
And of course, something as venerated, as expensive as First Folio has been stolen quite a few times from different places. I found mentions of at least 3 incidents in the 20th century, and rumors of more before that. So there's the Manchester copy, which is still missing. I think, and then there's the story of Durham's copy, and I think that one we should tell in a greater detail, because it involves some very colorful characters and very, very public outcry when it happened. So
you're exactly right. So this happened in 1998. The first folio was stolen, along with, I think it was half a dozen other important books, including medieval manuscripts. These were on display. They were in Cousins' library itself. So this is a 17th century library. The library that the first folio had been housed in for 400 years. It was gone. And Durham heard nothing about it. There was no sort of case to follow, no leads at all. And it was presumed lost. And that was the case until 2008, when the phone rang at Durham, and it was the FBI saying that someone had arrived at the Folger Library in Washington with a first folio. They wanted it identified and authenticated, and that the librarians at the Folger believed it was the missing Durham copy. What happened in those 10 years, we just don't know, and probably never will. So the book was shipped back to the UK, and after a lengthy and very public court case, it was returned to the University Library, where it is now.
By the way, how was it identified? I seem to recall that quite a lot was done for this not to happen, but I think it's absurd. How can you hide something like that? So was there a facsimile? What were the identifying marks?
So, and what's also important is the first folio at Durham was stolen along with several other books. We don't expect to ever get those back. The folio is the only one that came back because it's very difficult to disguise a first folio. The first folios are so well catalogued because of their notoriety for hundreds of years. We know more about every first folio than any other book. There was an extensive survey done in about 1900, 1901, and every copy was catalogued in extreme detail. Press variants, so changes in the printing, page numbers, spelling mistakes, that kind of thing, were all catalogued for every single copy. We knew the exact dimensions of every copy. So this is an incredible document that you can identify first folios with. So trying to pass off a first folio as another copy is extremely difficult. Attempts were made to disguise it. So the book was very heavily damaged. Anything that obviously identified it as a Durham copy was removed. So the binding, the boards were removed. Any trace of leather was removed. The end papers that contained library stamps and inscriptions were torn out. And really sadly, the iconic title page with the portrait of William Shakespeare has gone. It had a shelf mark on it. And yes, in order to prove it was a Durham copy, it took a bit of detective work, a bit of a forensic look at the book. But I believe it wasn't even contested in the end. The evidence was considered pretty conclusive.
This wasn't the only case of new copy and damaged copy that happened recently. Like I think 5 years ago, there was a partial copy found in Scotland, also missing the title page and whatnot. And for some, all the comedies for some reason. Somebody really didn't like the comedies and only left the sad bits and the histories. Yeah, but in that case, it was accepted as a new and previously unknown copy. So it wasn't probably that mad imagine that a somewhat mutilated copy would pass as a new one. But I'm really happy it wasn't.
No, you're right. Copies do turn up every couple of years. That the Isle of Bute copy you refer to there, sat in someone's library, and they just didn't know what it was. So yeah, it's not completely out of the question. It could have been one. The story was it was found in Cuba. It's not impossible.
It's there's a very interesting book by Eric Rasmussen about all of the sort of the histories of the stolen first folios. And he mentions, that they looked into first folios that had rumored origins in Spanish provenance. So, there was really a rigorous look at not only at the object itself to identify, yes, this matches the description of the Durham First Folio, but also, have we heard any rumors of a book that might have ended up in Cuba? Is there any way that it could have been there? And there was some excitement and some hope that might be the case, but I think the physical evidence of our copy being our copy was just so undeniable that it wasn't even worth really following up on those books with Spanish provenance.
So, should we talk about the competition? We talked a bit about the book and the books, our main goal today was to discuss the competition and what was the idea behind the competition, when it all started, the preparation, and
Well, I think we might actually say that. So we discussed the fact that our first folio was sort of mutilated when it was recovered. It had been vandalized. It had no binding on it. And it was put in an enclosure and held in our strong rooms with plans towards rebinding it. And when it came to us, Tony and I, were asked to start a project to conserve our first folio. And the question arose, if we do rebind this first folio that's been mutilated, what binding do we put it in? There's no obvious choice. The binding, when Bishop Cousin would have bought it, he would have bought it in probably a fairly plain brown leather binding contemporary to his era. Our book was rebound in the 1840s by a man named Charles Tuckett. We know that particular style of binding because we have other examples of it in our collection. It's been vandalized and it doesn't have a binding now. The 1840s didn't feel any hesitation in rebinding this book in a book contemporary to their tastes and styles. Should we rebind it in something, cousin appropriate, Charles Tuckett appropriate, as it would have been before it was stolen, something, a conservation binding, as it were, something a little more contemporary, but, functional, but not particularly celebratory and beautiful? Or should we do something, incredibly, 21st century modern binding? And then we got to asking, what would bookbinders of today put a first folio in? Every era has gotten to rebind first folios. And it says something about that era, about how they decide to decorate it, how they decide to celebrate Shakespeare. And so the question was there. It was so obvious we had to actually ask our bookbinding community, how would you bind a first folio? And while we haven't made the choice to have our first folio itself rebound in a modern binding, we want to have a facsimile of our first folio bound in a modern binding that we can put into our collection and say, and this is a bookmark. This is what our era says a first folio should be bound as. So that's where our competition originated.
Interesting. The facsimile is also an interesting thing to discuss, and
it's a difficult thing to make happen too. Turns out.
I was gonna ask what's going to happen to the book after it gets rebound, if it gets rebound, and what's gonna happen to the books, to a facsimile that is bound by a modern bookbinder? Are you gonna display it, or is it gonna be? What's the future for this project? It hasn't happened yet, but.
So yeah, this project, really at the heart of the project, is to give the first folio a future. Our copy has been sat in secure storage since 2008. It came out once. It was exhibited when it was returned in a celebration, but really it's been unused since then. I mean, the reason for that is it's extremely badly damaged, much worse than we thought originally when it first came back. The sewing supports, it looks like it's got 5 intact sewing supports across the spine, 5 cords. In fact, 3 of those are missing. It's quite unusual, but they've actually been removed. So all that's holding the book together really is the animal glue on the spine. So it's breaking up. So if the book were to be used, read, it would fall apart quite quickly, we think. So we wanted to do something with the book. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to have and to share, but we just couldn't figure out how to do it safely. Now, as Lauren was saying, we were given this task of doing something around the conservation of the book. And ultimately that got us thinking as to future uses for the book and why would we rebind it? What's to be gained by rebinding it? There are 235 copies in the world. There are quite a few in England and in the north of England as well. If you're researching a first folio, you can go online and you can see dozens of really excellent digital reproductions. Do we want to rebind our one and have another copy which would look beautiful and be cause a great celebration? It would be drawing a line under the theft and the vandalism. But really, for researchers, was there value in having a disbound, a vandalized copy, which research could be done on, but perhaps a different type of research? So research you couldn't do on any other first folio, but you can do on the Durham one because it is kind of in bits. You can access the sewing structure. You can see what was going on under the leather. So this project quickly turned into what we thought would be a conservation project on the First Folio to a research project on the First Folio. And from that, the competition was launched that we still consider bookbinding as a really important craft that we want to support and see what the best 21st century interpretation this would be. So in terms of the facsimile copy, that will be accessioned into our special collections at Durham, and it'll actually join the First Folio, on the shelves in our secure store, and it will be something researchers in the future can look at. We maintain a collection of the history of the book, so books we feel are important to the history, the study of the history of the book, and this would join that as an exemplar of current bookbinding craft.
I think it's also worth noting that as we were working through this decision-making process, the question came up of what role does a binding actually play in the life of a book? Because we've seen the Victorians are perfectly happy to rip off historical bindings and put on their new bindings. We were discussing that earlier.
Well, not only Victorians. It seems that it continued to until the first half of the 20th century.
An entire historical past of being willing to get rid of historical bindings and evidence of historical bindings. And that's not exactly where we're at now. Durham University is really focusing on studying the book as a physical object, as an archaeological object. And so when we were considering conserving our first folio, we had to consider the archaeological implications of changing the binding. And so I think the bookbinding competition works really in tandem with our decision to, for now, not to rebind this book, but to research it in its current state by saying, yes, book bindings are intrinsic properties of a book. Let us celebrate that intrinsic property of a book by looking at how the modern artists who make that happen, go about celebrating the text inside and the significance of the binding itself, or of the text itself.
Sorry, Pasha, I will interrupt you again. I've been a bit distracted because we had some technical issues on Facebook somehow, and I was trying to fix it. And but it's an amazing topic today because we can go on so many tangents, and something that we discussed quite a lot on our podcast and our live streams before is that the fact that there is this attitude from librarians and many other people towards bindings to sort of exclude them from discussion, or there are many digital archives where you can find perfectly digitized books, but then there are almost no photographs or images of bindings, which always upset me quite a lot, because the first thing I'm interested in the book is a binding, and it's not too hard to provide at least 3 or 4 images of the binding, of the structure, but it wasn't in the scope of so many professionals, unfortunately. So is this connection working well in Durham?
Yeah. So yeah, I share your feelings there that it's really annoying to search a catalogue looking for a particular type of binding and you never find them. Yeah, I think Lauren mentioned this, that we are seeing a shift from researchers actually towards the physicality of the book. This idea that the binding, the binding is a product of the period, and it reflects. It's not. It's functional, but it's beyond that. It's an artistic expression. It's an expression of the period it was made in. And if you're researching the technical process of binding, the artistic process of binding, and what that says about the time period, it's vital, really. So yeah, I mean, when books are digitized at Durham, so we have a digitization department, our aim isn't to digitize the text that every other university is digitizing, because if you can find a copy that's online, what's the point of putting another copy online? We're really interested in copy-specific information. So that includes inscriptions, interesting damage, things like that, and of course the binding. So there is a move now more towards photographing the binding, but also doing more analysis on the structure using heritage science techniques. So Durham is doing a lot of work with our chemistry department. We have a project called Team Pigment, who've been working for 10 years looking at medieval pigments, so doing non-destructive analysis of these pigments. And we're working with them to actually use the First Folio project as a sort of case study to how we can use these techniques on printed books to learn more about them. So I see it like a librarian cataloging a book. They'll do a very detailed catalog of the text. This is doing exactly the same thing, but with modern heritage science and so bookbinding knowledge, saying these are the inks that were used, this is the sewing structure, this is copy-specific information of a more technical nature. But for researchers, they are really interested in this, and they can't really get to it. So yeah, definitely share your opinion there that the binding and other information should really be there as well as photographs of the words.
Yeah. I really hope this approach will spread all over the world. That not only to libraries but also to to museums and exhibitions, because oftentimes you go to an exhibition and there is some interesting binding there, and firstly it's always a pain to exhibit books because you open it on the one spread and you can't see anything else. But then, Pavel can attest, every time we go to a museum or an exhibition where there are some old bindings there, I start walking around the display and trying to glimpse under the book or behind the book or something. And there are always, lights wrongly placed to see any part of the
Blaring
book.
Right in your face.
Yeah. So, yeah, some things are changing, but it's a slow process. But yeah.
Yeah, well, perhaps now is a good time to mention the exhibition we're planning, which you must come to, because that is a real celebration of the physicality of the book, and particularly the First Folio. So we're launching that in April 2025. So it's going to run April to October next year at Palace Green Library in Durham. And the First Folio will be exhibited. Also, shortlisted entrants from the competition and the winning entrant, of course, will be exhibited as well alongside. So there'll be two tandem exhibitions really celebrating the history of the book, the history of the First Folio, bookbinding, and all these issues we're talking about today. Decision-making around conserving books, especially the First Folio with its really turbulent history where the damage is kind of upsetting, but we're preserving that damage as an important part of that story. And there'll be plenty of opportunity to have a good look at the binding or lack of. And the one thing we can do with the First Folio, which you can't do with any other copy, is with the Durham copy, you can see a lot more of it. It's not just a single opening and that's it for the duration. You can see we've got 8 separated leaves at the front. You can look at both sides of those. The binding, or the lack of binding, the text block rather, will be sort of almost vertically shown in a display case, so you can walk around it and get a 360 view of the book. So we're hoping it's going to be a very different exhibition. With the 400th anniversary of the printing last year, there were quite a few public exhibitions of First Folios. This is going to be quite different and maybe quite challenging to see the book in this condition. But hopefully it'll be a really exciting and well-attended event. And of course, the competition entrants that are shortlisted will be shown as part of this. And hopefully it'll be a lot of exposure for bookbinding.
And do you think this almost forensic approach of describing the physical book of chemical analysis and so on will eventually tell us something about where it spent 10 years? Or maybe I think now it's unlikely, but maybe in later years, and maybe we'll know more about its earlier history. Maybe we'll know who exactly used it, how they used it, because I know there's been this first experiments with collecting samples with some kind of sticky tape, library class sticky tape used for cleaning, and then getting DNA from it. So who knows? Bishop Cousins' descendants will give their DNA and will know if he personally touched the book and which was his favorite play.
So that's exactly the sort of thing that we're hoping to explore as we're working through the various investigative sort of tracts of looking at this book. We did discuss actually DNA sampling of the book. There's actually a lot of GDPR questions, questions about keeping individuals' personal information secret and safe in a legal manner that complicates the question of DNA testing our book, especially as every employee who's handled it, has DNA now on the book, and so that implies modern GDPR questions. I attended a lecture, I believe, last year in Copenhagen, and I'm very sorry I'm going to forget the researchers' names because I'm really bad at names. But she was testing tree pollens that they found in the gutter of books, of text blocks, to try to find, where these books had traveled in the past. And while our book is too fragile at the moment to sort of open it and get into the gutter and test those tree pollens, those sort of techniques absolutely exist and, are innovative and exciting. And that's the sort of thing that we would be interested in pursuing with this book as we progress in time over investigating it, certainly.
I'll read a couple of comments because we have a sort of discussion on Facebook happening there. Firstly, Mark Cockram joined us from London.
Oh, hi, Mark.
And then Rebecca Bookshop wrote, "Oh, looking forward to this. It's a lovely library and has some great exhibition. However, this one is amazing." So. And Mark also wrote, "Yes, I have visited the library many years ago, and everything sounds cool." So maybe we brought a couple of new visitors, advanced visitors to your exhibition already, hopefully. Yeah, it's interesting how I think we discussed this as well. I think it was Rita Udina, a book and paper conservator from Barcelona. We had her a couple of years ago on our podcast, and we discussed the fact that previously it was sort of when you were repairing or conserving or I'm blanking on the word. Anyway, the book, the approach was to remove all the dust, clean it, and store it in a way that will preserve it for the future generations. And then the approach shifted that you have to keep everything that you found in the book, all the dust, everything, because it can lead to further research and further findings about the book, about the history of the book, about the users of the book. So yeah, it's great to see the approach changing, because it's not that hard to keep all of that, and then you can get some exciting findings there.
I think it's difficult to do with every book because every book you clean is going to create dust, and then you've got to store it, and then you've got to store, bags and bags of dust or folders, and libraries are always at a premium for shelf space. But especially in cases where a book is iconic, its history is, particularly compelling or interesting, especially, like our first folio, it's definitely worth those linear shelving meters that you're going to spend keeping the evidence. And I think that as this history of the book as a physical object sort of takes hold in the library world, and as researchers come to, realize the value of what all that is, it will be more and more worth it for libraries to maintain those kind of collections in that way, that kind of conservation in that way.
Oh, don't worry. In about a century, everybody will be looking at books as archaeological artifacts, and they will be treated as such.
Oh.
Yeah. So as I already mentioned, it's really hard not to go on tangents and on tangents during this discussion. But you already mentioned the exhibition, and sort of we have to go backwards, because before we get to the exhibition, we need to discuss the deadlines of the competition and what people are going to bind for this competition and what's happening. Well, judges, prizes, everything. So let's start with deadlines. What's happening there?
So the deadline should be available on our website. We have unfortunately had to change our deadlines from the original announcement. I say unfortunately, it actually gives people more time to bind.
Sorry to interrupt you, Pasha. Maybe you will open the website and we'll just browse through it, and so that we have some additional information there.
So here we are, Cousins Library.
So
What
if you
should
scroll
we say?
down,
Yeah.
competition
Mm-hmm.
timeline should give you a good
Yeah,
idea
new
of the dates.
Yeah.
So, just to give us an idea of how many people are entering and how many books to expect, we've set a date in October for entry form and fee. You don't have to tell us what you're binding by that point. Just tell us that you are binding so that we can prep space for you. And then we hope to get your submissions by February. The submissions should consist of one bound object, a book related to Shakespeare, the story of the Durham First Folio, thematically related in some way, and a proposal for a facsimile binding. And the relation between those two submissions should be the proposal is just a poster. We want to see your skills, your technical ability, commensurate skills demonstrated on the binding that you send us. And that should be in by February. We have a judging panel convening in, I believe, March. And then in that time, we'll decide our winners, notify the winners, design our exhibition layout. And then the exhibition should open in April and will be open until October, I believe. Yes. We were very excited to get the panel of judges that we managed to get.
That was my next question. Who are the judges? Yeah.
Yes, so Sir Greg Doran has been sort of talking with us. He is the former artistic director of sorry, Tony, you're going to have to fill this
That's
one
right.
in for me.
Yeah, so you're right here. He's former artistic director at the Royal Shakespeare Company. So Greg not only has a really illustrious career of directing Shakespeare, he is something of an expert in the First Folio. He's been traveling around the world recently looking at every single copy that he can get his hands on. And he's been a great supporter of this project since the beginning.
Yep. So Mr. Stuart Hunt is the head of our libraries. He's very enthusiastic in the way that this project has been run. He's enthusiastic in supporting future conservation projects that sort of are single book focused and help us learn about materiality and the history of books. We've got Mr. Dominic Riley, who is a well-known bookbinder, conservator, nice guy all around. And he's there to lend our bookbinding knowledge, a sound knowledge on the techniques and skills. Professor Emma Smith, she's a professor of Shakespeare Studies at Oxford University. She's probably very well known for several of her publications on the First Folio. She has come around with Greg Doran to discuss our First Folio, see our First Folio, talk about the project with us, a wonderful supporter. And then finally, we have Dr. Danielle Westerhoff, who is the head librarian, curator of rare books, at Durham University Palace Green Library. She is very knowledgeable of the Cousin collection and is head of acquisitions, I believe, within the library. So any book that we're going to bring in certainly has to be seen by her. And I think everyone seems really excited to see what bindings are going to come out of this. They've all been very enthusiastic. We've got the screen that you're looking at right now is several interviews that we've had with them, just some questions that we asked them to let you get to know your panel judges better. So please read at your leisure.
Can I stop sharing now, or do you want? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what will the criteria be? Because these are five very different people fixed. Yeah, what are they looking for?
So
And
I think
can you tell us that, because it can sort of guide the participants to do something specific. But
Well, before we start, I mean, Lauren and I are not on the panel, so whatever we tell you is our personal thoughts on the book. But yeah, we're not going to sway you in any particular direction. But yeah, I suppose we're looking for an outstanding bit of bookbinding craft, so something that really celebrates skills of bookbinders, and something that's very creative. I'm looking forward to being surprised. We've tried to make the brief quite broad, which can be frustrating at times, I'm sure, but we want people to really read about the story of the Durham First Folio, be inspired by it, and turn that into a creative output in terms of bookbinding. It could be something that looks back and is more historical in nature, more of a historical binding. That's absolutely fine. I look forward to seeing those. Or it could be extremely modern. We've talked about how people who rebound first folios in the past, sometimes they looked back and did a oldie worldy style binding, and other times they did something that was the pinnacle of that period, of the taste of that period. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing a great variety, I think.
Yeah.
And in terms of size, in terms of materials, in terms of structures, you do want to display it, so it should be something you can display at the very
Yes.
minimum.
So, so there are, I believe we set maximum and minimum sizes, which you can find on the website
Very
for the
wise
binding that
of
you
you.
should send in. And I had a binder recently contact me about those maximum sizes. And due to the limitations of our case, that's where we set the maximum sizes. So please don't exceed the maximum. We might not be able to put it in the case that we're planning on putting it in. Nothing taller. So in terms of structure, we didn't actually limit what structure we expect to see, in particular because, we were asking ourselves what structure we would put on it. And that's part of the question. What structure do you think should go on a first folio? We certainly ask that your proposed binding should be a structure that is appropriate to a book the size of the first folio. It is a large and heavy book. Tony has a facsimile right there. It is.
I have a first folio at home, and so this is this is the dimensions of the Durham First Folio. It's a very substantial book. So yeah, we're not limiting structure choice, but I mean it has to be a functional binding, and to support a text block of this size.
So please keep that in mind as you bind your. We're probably expecting to see a lot of beautiful French fine bindings. I'm a particular fan. Again, I'm not on the judging panel, but I'm a fan of French fine bindings, so I'd love to see that. But whatever people bring to the table is what they feel is appropriate for the first folio. And in terms of materials, the same. I mean, Tony and I certainly are inclined towards materials that will age well. We have an eye towards longevity in a rare books collection. But the creativity of modern binders is that they are, bringing automobile paints and, I don't know, plastics of all sorts. And yes, they will probably eventually cause a lot of conservational questions, but that's a project for a future conservator.
Yeah, I'm most interested in the most experimental bindings that will pop out in this competition, because it's truly interesting to see what new ideas will be realized. And
Can we clarify this bit? So it needs to be a binding of a book related to Shakespeare and a proposal for a binding for the first folio, and how the two must be related.
I think we keep using the phrase commensurate skills. So if you're proposing, if your poster proposal says I'm going to be putting a lot of gold tooling on this book, we hope that the book that you send in as an example of your skill as a binder shows us a lot of gold tooling. If you're putting onlays, if you're putting inlays, we want you to show us your skill in applying onlays and inlays into leather. If you're proposing to use an unusual material, we would hope to see it in your binding that you send in, just so that we know that your skill is commensurate to what you're proposing to bringing to the table with your proposal.
But the submitted binding doesn't have to be a prototype. It doesn't have to be a scale model of the proposal, but they should be harmonious. You should be able to say this person can do that, and I see where they're going artistically and creatively. And also, we should talk about the prize of the competition. So there will be cash prizes for the winning entrants. The actual first place entrant also wins a commission to bind a facsimile. So I think we said this before, but just to reiterate, the winner will be sent a facsimile in sheets, which we're working on producing at the moment, which is challenging, and we will ask them to actually action their proposal, so to create this proposed binding for the library.
I'd like to add that a lot of work went into trying to design this bookbinding competition as something that would actually be appealing and financially viable for entrants. We wanted to make sure that you would know you would get a cash prize and you would get your proposed binding back, so that if it belongs to a client or if you want to sell it, you have not only a cash prize in hand, but you have your binding that can be another asset for, for making bookbinding a viable, choice as a profession. We all know how hard it is out there to be a design binder. So we worked with several design binders to sort of talk through the process of prize giving, so that this would actually be a viable choice for folks to make to actually enter.
Good.
And who is the competition open to? Is this an international competition?
This is an international competition. We've advertised as widely as we could. We had some trouble getting in contact with some of the international bookbinding organizations, not for lack of effort. We just weren't able to get in touch with them, but we've advertised throughout the UK, in Canada, in the US. We've put it on various distribution lists, just trying to get the word out as far as possible to binders the world over. Okay. And then I think, sorry?
Go ahead, Lauren.
I was just saying, I hope that, the international entrants actually do come, because that's another perspective on Shakespeare on the First Folio. We want to see, everyone's ideas here.
And what about the practicalities of that? So people need to send in the books. How long will the judging take? And if they win, they will be at the exhibition. So the whole process, how long will it take?
So I believe that those details will be on the website. So refer to the website just in case I get any of the details wrong. We would like the bindings to be received here by mid-February. The judging will take place over March. The exhibition lasts for 6 months. And we said we would return the book bindings within, I believe, 9 months. So that just gives us a little window to make sure that we can return things. The method of entering your actual materials and the information that needs to come with that will be mailed out after October, when we've confirmed all the entirety of the body of entrants. if that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Mark Cockrum on Facebook commented, bookbinding viable.
Yes, bookbinding is viable.
Yeah, that's
Hi, Mark.
that's an issue to live off bookbinding and making books. That's often not so easy. I'll read a couple of comments, and I also wanted to use this opportunity to. We have some new viewers both on Facebook and YouTube, and I wanted to invite them to ask questions if they have any questions, because I think we're talking for almost an hour already, and we will probably gradually move from the competition to discussing book conservation in general. I hope so, because we definitely wanted to talk about this as well. So if you have any questions about competition, please post them. We can always return to this topic. Also, Tony had some images to share with us. I guess we will move to that as well. And we also have some links in the description. There is a link to the competition page. Please check it. And there is a link to our Patreon account, because, well, support of our patrons is quite important to us and allows us to do some research and to do some editing sometimes or some other things. So please consider supporting us on Patreon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram. And Dave Turnbull wrote, it would be fantastic if those entering the competition also provided details of how they create their binding. This is sort of relevant to what we discussed before, and it's part of the competition to provide information about their ideas of the binding of the folio, or of the facsimile of the folio. But will this information be made public during the exhibition or whenever? So what's the thought process there?
Absolutely, yeah. So we wanted to include that whole process, that creative process, within the exhibition. So obviously we will have the submitted bindings on display, but also the proposals, so printed up on sort of graphics on the display, but also that text to say, from the binder's point of view, this is my interpretation, this is where it's coming from, and this is my reasons for submitting this. So yeah, we really wanted to try and shine a light on the trade, the craft of bookbinding in a way that perhaps isn't normally done, and to a group of visitors who perhaps aren't aware of this as a hopefully viable and trade with a future. So yeah, that's definitely a key part of the exhibition.
Yeah, we if you look at the website, one of the prizes is going to be a popular vote prize. So we felt it was really important to display all the elements of the entry, including the physical entrant, the poster, and the artist statements that go along with them, so that as conscientious as the voters want to be, they can take all of these elements into consideration in order to give a cash prize as a popular vote as well, in addition to the panel prizes.
And getting a bit back to the documentation part, is it? I think it's essential, and we talked to many restorers, but also designer bookbinders, to document the materials, the processes, the structures of binding, especially those entering public collections, because there are a few livres d'artistes made in the last 30 years, which nobody knows how they were made, and now they are starting to deteriorate. And I talked to a guy who worked on books by Louis Bourgeois, and they have no idea what kind of textiles those were, what adhesives were used, how it was attached, nothing about the structure. And every time you're trying to find it, what are you supposed to do with it?
That's the real sort of catch-22 of modern binding, isn't it? We want people to be exciting and innovative, and then it causes problems down the road. But as much as the binders can document what they're doing, scholars, academics, conservators, certainly of the future, are going to be incredibly grateful to have that information. And even having a store of that information, from a large community of binders, if there is a binder that's sort of outside of that community and not making those records, we'll have information about what's going on at the time so that we can sort of draw some conclusions about what might have been going on outside of documentation, what decisions might have been made or materials used, that sort of thing.
But there's also another aspect of documentation of the process and making it available to the public. It's very important, I think, for the whole community, whole binding community, to show more. I know there are many people on Instagram and now on TikTok even. But if we want more people to get interested, to appreciate the craft, to understand why it takes so long and what it involves, we really need to talk to the public directly.
Absolutely. And I think there's a great potential interest up here in the North in the craft of bookbinding, but there's not a huge number of sort of book centers up here. If you want to do a lot of bookbinding education in England, you're probably going to have to go farther down south into London. And that's where a lot of things are happening. So it's really nice to sort of promote the art of bookbinding and the craft of bookbinding to this community up here.
So there are a couple of comments I wanted to read. Again, we have Victoria Mansfield. Hi everyone, 7 a.m. here in the USA. Victoria is our regular, and at 7 a.m. that's dedication on
Quite
Saturday.
a dedication.
That's dedication, yeah.
Fatima Lorgat, hi from Ziyad in the UK. Sorry, I'm late. No worries. You still have an opportunity to ask your questions. We still have something like 30 minutes to go until we finish our live stream. Also, Rebecca Bookshop, is there a beginner's hobbyist category? That's an interesting question. I guess I have an idea how it can work, but what you can say?
So we do have a student and new bookbinder prize. Sorry, I'm pulling down just to find newcomer prize is what we ended up calling it, which will be awarded to the outstanding submission from an individual who started binding within the last 3 years or has never entered a bookbinding competition before. So we certainly, that was, we were talking about the fact that we took great care in trying to make sure that this was an actually appealing, competition for our binders to enter. And so my origins, I was a student of bookbinding at North Bennett Street School in the US. And entering a bookbinding competition for the first time is really scary. We know that you're putting this work that you're fairly new to. You may be very proud of it, but you're very new to the work. And you're sending it in alongside bookbinders who have been practicing for 20, 30, 40 years, and their skills are at, their zenith. And so we wanted to make sure to invite newcomers as well, because, you may be new, but you still have your own perspective and your own abilities. And we want to see that. We want to encourage students. We want to encourage people who maybe haven't had formal training, but have, really done their due diligence by reading the books and, watching videos, using the resources out there to create it. And so, even if you've been in it for 5 years, but you've never entered a competition before, maybe now is the time, send in your entry. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, exactly. At least it will make you to try to follow the constraints of the competition and try to make something new. So experiment, and you lose nothing besides the entry fee, which is not that high compared to many other competitions. So that's also
we set it at a low barrier of entry because we wanted to make it, again, an accessible competition. This is, we want everyone to have their perspective. Shakespeare, it may be cliched, but Shakespeare belongs to everyone. So everyone who wants to bind him should get to bind him.
Yeah. When I posted the announcement of for our today's talk, I was sort of, I wrote something like, everyone loves bookbinding competitions, and I was absolutely sure that somebody will comment something like, I don't like bookbinding competitions, something like that. And well, my idea was that even if you don't like to participate in bookbinding competitions, it's always a good discussion point and experimental moment for many. And if you don't want to participate, you can always see what other people created for the competition. So it's just a great opportunity, all in all, for bookbinding and for bookcraft, I think. So yeah. I hope that's the message people will get from my my announcement.
And I think similarly, we say that, Shakespeare belongs to everyone. That's maybe to some degree a colonialist view of like, this is one of the greatest writers of all time. But even if you don't love Shakespeare, most everyone's got an opinion on him at this point, and you've had some form of experience with him. It's sort of ubiquitous. So yeah, it's an accessible concept, at least to that degree.
But we should also probably mention that many translations of Shakespeare in other languages have become part of those languages' culture. Say, certain Russian translations were made by some of our greatest poets, and many phrases entered the language. Obviously not in the original, but in translation, and it's often not those phrases that have entered English language, which is interesting. Yes. There was a PhD thesis by a friend of mine tracing how different the fates of these famous sayings have been in English, Russian, and Armenian, and those are three different sets. There are some intersections, but anyway, I wanted to ask you. So we talked about professionals and not hobbyists, but newcomers, yeah. And also we talked about the international appeal of the competition and of the book itself. But you're also a local institution. Do you engage with local book culture? Other local or local-ish bookbinders that you hope to attract, for example?
Certainly, actually, where I met Dominic Riley in order to ask him to be a judge for our competition, I was taking a class in gold tooling at the Lytton Phil Society, which is in Newcastle. And there's sort of a robust little community of bookbinders over there, and we'd certainly love to see entries from them. I don't know of huge other.
So the Society of Bookbinders, the Northeast region, meet at the Lytton Phil in Newcastle. So yeah, I mean, they're probably our most direct connection with local binders. And yeah, we'd like to do a lot more with binders in the Northeast, certainly. We are hosting a visit from the Society of Bookbinders later in the year. But yeah, I mean, maybe this will kick off more of an engagement. I really hope so.
I would be very pleased to, find out about more binders who are local. I know we've met several university students who do it as a hobby, and we're very excited to hear that we were having a competition. And I hope they enter as well. But yeah, I'd love to meet more local bookbinders. That would be fantastic.
Fatima Lorgat asked, could Lauren share the dimensions of the first folio, please? I couldn't see that on the website yesterday. And I think Tony showed us showed us the dimensions, but if you have them in centimeters.
So the text block should be, oh no, I'm gonna have to remember this off the top of my head. 330 millimeters tall.
I've got it here, Lauren, and you're
Oh,
correct.
thank goodness.
So, yeah, it is on the website. It might be a little bit buried. So I've got it here under the terms and conditions, which is a strange place to find it, but I'm sure it's elsewhere. So the facsimile text block will be 300 by 210 millimeters height and width. And we're not 100% sure the depth of it. We're expecting it to be about 45 millimeters. But because we're still producing this facsimile and we haven't picked out, we haven't decided on the paper for it, that may change a little bit. But the key ones are height and width, 330 by 210. Yeah.
Rebecca Bookshop wrote, it's hard to find places to learn in the Northeast. Yeah, it's hard to find places to learn bookbinding in general. That's an issue. And I just wanted to mention, by the way, Lauren, we mentioned North Bennett Street School. I think alumni of North Bennett Street School is the largest group among our guests on our podcast and our live stream somehow.
Well, hi, fellow grads.
Well, I think American Academy of Bookbinding is competing a little bit there, but yeah, these groups are intersecting in some way. Victoria Mansell wrote, if I had to read it before binding and entering the competition, would be long over. I look forward to seeing the results of this competition, and no, I won't be entering. Well, maybe next time some other competition as well. Also, Fatima, and newcomers are defined as those working for less than 3 years. How would you include those who are semi-self-taught?
That's a very good question. I think the form that we send is a sort of self-selecting form. Do you consider yourself a bookbinder or a newcomer? Please check this box here. So we're holding people to their, honest opinions. If you're self-taught, 5 years may feel more like 3 years of concentrated work, but especially if you've never entered a competition before and have been in longer than 3 years, if this is your first competition, you're certainly welcome to submit yourself as a newcomer. I also, yes, I understand the inclination to read an entire book before binding it. And I hadn't really considered that difficulty with the first folio because it is a big book. So I would encourage, even if you don't have time to read the entire book, maybe revisit some of your favorite Shakespeare plays or watch a Shakespeare, play that's been recorded. We have several pages on the Cousin Library website that talks about the history of our first folio, sort of the importance of a first folio generally, as well as the specifics of our binding or our book and our decision-making process. We're writing a blog about our process. So there's information out there that's sort of supplemental that might give you ideas of how to address a Durham First Folio in particular.
Sorry to interrupt, Lauren, but I think that's really key that as well as being a first folio, the Durham First Folio has had such a unique history to it. And I think that is probably a rich place to draw inspiration from, as much as the amazing Shakespearean legacy. Are there elements of that drama that could be reflected in the binding? And yet, if you find Shakespeare impenetrable, could that be a source of inspiration? I don't know. We're looking forward to seeing lots of different takes on this. And if you have an unusual take on it, by all means, go for it.
Well, Dave Turnbull in the comments is saying that his experience with Shakespeare is an episode of Doctor Who. And yes, Shakespeare has been a character of many a book, many a conspiracy theories. That could be an inspiration. Hopefully not. Like, you know,
I very much enjoyed that Doctor Who episode, just saying.
Yeah, me too. But imagine a binding of all the people proposed to have been the authors of this place, like Shakespeare's from A to Z.
Yeah.
Hmm?
There's, I mean, you have to also consider our first folio has, lost its portrait page. That famous portrait of Shakespeare is gone. So maybe the many faces of Shakespeare is, something you can draw from. Who else's faces are associated with this?
Well,
you never know.
We have to know that we are not entirely sure where that image on frontispiece comes from. The only portrait that we can be fairly certain about is the one above his grave, this sculptural effigy that was made by a friend, I think, and certainly by someone who knew him. But we don't know that this is a live portrait. We don't know that. Correct me.
No, but we do know that the Moon-Schott portrait is iconic to the concept of the folio.
So there is another comment I've been keeping from almost the beginning of our live stream, and I hope we still have some time. I hope it will allow us to shift a little bit to other conservation projects besides First Folio, just for a little bit, because it's so interesting, and I think there is area for discussion for us for more than an hour and a half, and it would be great to talk more, but it's Saturday and all of us have plans, and so Dave Turnbull,
and it's actually nice weather today.
Yeah, finally it's nice weather. Dave Turnbull again wrote, I've got a couple of books from 1850s that have detached front covers. I have no plans or skills to do anything to them other than store them carefully to preserve the exact states they're in. I'm just holding them for the future in case they become of interest to others. And it's sort of connected to something we posted on Facebook, on our iBookBinding's Facebook a couple of days ago. There was a news piece about a couple from Salt Lake City, or well, somewhere in Utah. They during renovations they found a century-old book that was without covers, and in the photo the person holds this book in cotton gloves, and there is it's always interesting to see how I'm not saying that these 1850s books are the same as this 5th edition of something that was found in Salt Lake City. But there is such a disconnect between the idea of old book and valuable book and a book that deserves conservation and books that deserves repairs. Even in my personal experience as a bookbinder, I had several occasions when a client comes to me and asks to repair a book, and I tell them, I don't know, it will cost $100, $200. And I was living in Russia back then, so it was much cheaper compared to services in other countries. But still, it was a significant amount for Moscow, for Russia. And they were like, I can buy a copy of this book for, I don't know, $10, and you are asking like $200 to repair it. And I had to explain that it takes some time, and if the book has sentimental value for you, you have to pay, because, well, otherwise you can buy another copy of this book. So it's a tricky issue, and unfortunately many people do not have this, they do not connect the dots between the processes. So a long tangent again. Which other conservation projects are you working on, and what is this scope from the point of view of period, for example, of your work, or you work on everything?
So Lauren and I work in Palace Green Library, which is part of Durham University. So this is a historic library, but also it houses the archives of the university. So these are archival collections that don't just come from Durham, they come from all around the world, and even have objects in them as well that support the archive collection. Also, the university has a very large museum called the Oriental Museum. We have historic properties. Durham Castle is run by the university. So we have a lot of conservation outside of the world of books to deal with as well. We have within our team, we have book specialists, more general archive conservators, paper conservators, and we work with local painting conservators, sculpture conservators, whatever material that we're encountering at the time. But we are ultimately a library, and we are a studio that works with library materials first and foremost. I think probably a really interesting project is Lauren's work actually on Bishop's Cousins Library. So not just the First Folio within that library, but the conservation of 5,000 of the 17th century books. And talking about the economics of this, where do you target your limited resources here? Are you going to target it on a dozen books over a year, say? Or are there elements of preservation you can do to stabilize large quantities of books? And they're not going to get any better. They still will have detached boards, for instance, but by slowing down deterioration through environmental controls or packaging projects, is that actually a better use of conservative time? However, we would need to preserve these interventive conservation skills. So I think Lauren's been doing lots of work in striking a balance there on more of almost a scientific basis. How are we choosing which books to conserve here? Because as conservators and bookbinders, we might go in and say, this book is in terrible condition. I don't know what the book is. I don't really know any of its history. We may have 5 other copies, or it might be the only copy in the world. So trying to talk to curators and librarians and get their input into conservation is super important. And yeah, I think, Lauren, that's been a real challenge for you, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So when I started working at Durham University, I did a book-by-book survey of those 5,000 books in the Cousin collection. And I, as a conservator, could look at it and say, okay, this one has a board detached, and this one has both boards detached, and this one has both boards and a spine detached, and paper damage. And I can easily rank, which one is the most broken of the books, and that's absolutely fine. But that doesn't help me in any way towards actually achieving the goals of the library. And so one of the sort of innovative and exciting things that Durham University had already put in place before I started here was having catalogers, when they look at these objects, give them what they call a book historical grade. And it sounds it sort of flattens the concept of an important book, but you're looking at a book of, does this have high significant local value? Is this the only one of the kind? Do we have researchers asking for this every other week? Or has this book been on the shelf for, years and years and years, and nobody's interested in looking at it? And there's 3 digitized copies online, and there's nothing copy specific to it. And so being able to take a sort of a green to red sort of stoplight rating of how broken a book is, and combine that with the understanding of sort of a green to red, how important this book is to the collection of the library, we're actually able to sort of create a prioritization system so that I'm not fixing the most damaged book, I'm fixing the most damaged book that's in the most demand. And that's actually sort of answering the call of the readers, the researchers, the people who are using these books, rather than spending all my time fixing a book that's then never going to be looked at. It's a tricky balance to strike, certainly.
Okay, so what was the most important book you worked on?
That was my next question. You stole it from me. Yeah, I wanted to ask a bit different question, but whatever.
Is it cheating to say the First Folio? The First Folio has been taking up, at this point, a couple years of discussion and time and effort. So that it's definitely the most intense project that I've had. I mean,
but
most
besides the First Folio, what was your most interesting and challenging conservation project?
I would say, well, right now I'm working on a little binding from it's about palm sized. It's a tiny little thing from I believe 1578, and it is the only example of the 1578 printing of this. And there's a researcher who is doing, research on every edition of this book, and it is in an inaccessible state until I fix it. And so maybe it might be a cop-out to say the most important book is the book that's on my bench right now, because that's what I'm going to get out to the researcher next. And that's fairly important to me.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you, Lauren. And what about you, Tony?
There's a small collection of books we have at Durham which are really interesting. So these are from an organization called the Canonesses of the Holy Sepulchre. So it's a religious organization. They're not nuns, they're very similar to nuns, but they're canonesses. And this library was in Belgium. It was part of the school they ran. And what I love about this collection is the canonesses carried out their own DIY repairs of these books. So it's an 18th century collection, but they're wonderful repairs. So they show us the ingenuity of the canonesses to figure out how these books worked and what they had to hand to repair them. And the repairs are actually pretty good. They use materials like gloves, like kid gloves. They would cut those up and use those to support broken spines. And you can still see that these are clearly gloves that they've used. They used various sort of sewing techniques, which are pretty good. But in conserving them, we're trying to preserve these repairs as much as the books themselves. So that adds an extra layer of interest, I think, to me. And yeah, I guess what we're trying to do is reflect the interests of our researchers. I mean, at Durham, we're really fortunate that we work for a research library. We're here for researchers. And in the past, the researchers would come in and want to sit down and read the books. They want to read the text. Now they are looking at objects and also collections of objects. So this entire library has been in one place. It's been used in the same way. And researchers now are wanting to see evidence of its use and what it tells us about that group of people who interacted with it. So yeah, that's a collection I often think about. And it's always great fun to go through and look at these repairs.
And are we talking about an exiled community of Catholics, that kind of story?
Yeah, they had quite a story. So they fled England, I think in the early 17th century, moved to Belgium, and then came back about 100 years later. And they packed all their books up in these wooden crates. And we still have the crates that we used for transporting them. We also have the archive. So the library has the books, and we have the archive record that goes with it. So the administrative records for running the school and the order as well. And also objects. So we have paintings, and we have their vestments. It's a really great collection of things, and the books play an important role in that bigger story.
Interesting.
And does the library document those kind of things? Are there monographs of books published for broader public? I understand researchers love those details, but you need to condense them into a narrative. Like, for example, where can I read about Cousin's collection, or about this particular collection, or is this only a starting research project?
Yeah, no, that's great. So you might notice that our rare books librarians are called curators rather than librarians. So their role goes beyond just simply cataloguing for academic purposes. They're all about getting more interaction and more public awareness of our collections. So they're doing specific projects on the Cousin collection that we talked about, and even the Canonesses collection I just mentioned. So those are getting catalogued in great detail, but also we've got resources like the Cousin website, which is the portal through which you'll find out about the competition and the First Folio project. So this is looking at the books and the physical library interior as a visitor attraction, as something that we're inviting people to engage with at whatever level. If you want to come and read the books, that's also important to say. All of our books are publicly available. you can get a reader's ticket and you can order them up in the search room and you can come and read them. But if you just want to wander around a beautiful 17th century library and look at the books on the shelves, equally welcome. So yeah, that's definitely a change in the last few years, I think, towards, being more welcoming, more encouraging of visitors, and disseminating some of the things we find fascinating away from being a strictly academic pursuit for our academic colleagues to something broader and more engaging.
I hope there will be an opportunity for me at some moment to visit the library and your conservation lab, maybe to do a workshop tour or something like that, if that's possible. I'm not, I'm hoping, but not insisting. So
absolutely, no, you'll be extremely welcome. In fact, where the studio is in the library, we're very public. So we have exhibition galleries, and there's a gallery very much outside our front door with a big window, and people can look in and see what we're doing. So we have exhibitions about conservation, and you can look through the window and see us doing conservation.
We do sometimes feel like goldfish, but that's fine.
So we are at 90-minute mark. I hope you still have a couple of minutes to be with us, and we're not delaying you too much, because there is one question on YouTube I wanted to read, and also I still wanted to ask Tony to show some of the images from the presentation he showed us before we started our live stream, because it's amazing to see these images. Just so the question is already two questions from Fatima. First, has there been much interest in terms of number of entrants? I'm looking forward to entering. And then next one, is the Durham collection searchable online if one can't make it in person? So okay, two questions.
So yeah, we've since opening the entries, we've had sort of a steady trickle. As I mentioned, we have had to change our dates and our deadlines due to some renovation that's going on in the building. We just changed the dates so that the building will be more accessible when the exhibit comes, so that there will be more foot traffic and everyone will get to see the actual bindings. So there's sort of been a steady trickle, and there was the initial deadline, and we got a small rush, and then we extended the deadline, and now we're back to a steady trickle. So I'm guessing at our new deadline there will again be another little rush. But yeah, as we are absolutely thrilled to see the number of folks starting to come in, and we certainly hope to see more and more. And I think Tony might be frozen.
Yeah.
No.
For a moment. Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's fine.
Okay. Yes. Good.
And
sorry, what was the second question? Is
the Durham collection searchable online if one can't make it in person?
Yes. So we have our collections catalog online. We have a large number of our objects digitized, which should also be available. And we also, as a reading room, offer sort of a digital interface in case you're not able to make it, and we're able to sort of image a single object or a single leaf for you. Mm-hmm. There's a small fee associated with that process. But there are ways to access our materials even if you can't come in person.
Good. So, Tony, would you show us what you prepared? And I think it will be a great final point for our discussion.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see this slide.
Yeah.
So this is a PowerPoint presentation that was produced for something else, but it's got some really interesting images in it, and I'll just whiz through some of those. We have very few photographs of the Durham First Folio from before the theft in '98, which is really interesting. That might tell us something about it. This is a photograph from, I think, the 1930s with the librarian and a couple of students having a look at the First Folio. This is probably the best image we have of its binding before the theft. It looks a little bit broken in here. The joint area looks like it's kind of let go already. But you can see there the iconic title page, and opposite it the inscription from Ben Jonson. So all of that is now missing. Everything from the title page and earlier is gone. But yeah, I mean, this might show us how the book was used, perhaps by a lecturer, a librarian, explaining it to students like this. Okay, so yeah, there's a title page again. So this is another photograph of the Durham title page taken before the theft. What is interesting about this is in the top right corner, you can see, hopefully there's 2 shelf marks. There's W211, which is the cousin one, and cut off is half of the Peterhouse Cambridge shelf mark. So when this book was rebound in the 1840s, it was trimmed and the edges were gilt. So they actually trimmed the shelf mark off of there. So if you had stolen this book, this would be a really obvious sign it was a Durham copy. You know, not only does it have a cousin library shelf mark, it has an earlier shelf mark, which is photographed and known. Probably accounts for why it was removed. So I'll skip through these. It's just explaining how the folio was made. That it's single sheet of paper printed with 4 pages, 2 on each side, and folded to give you the biggest possible book you can get out of a sheet of paper. And here we are, the assembly of the sections. This is actually the book I held up to the camera before being sewn. So this is a 1960s facsimile, the Norton facsimile, which I think was produced by the Folger. I could be wrong. But yeah, it's a 1-to-1 scale folio facsimile. So I made up a copy of the binding we thought was on the folio at the point of the theft. So figuring out how Charles Tuckett rebound it in the 1840s, which is really interesting. Very interesting process, but we don't have time to talk about it today, I don't think. This is the Bodleian's, one of the Bodleian's first folios. And this is probably what the original binding would look like on the Durham copy. So pretty plain calf bindings and blind tooling, but it's not ornate. It's very plain. I think the first folio was sold bound for £1. It cost you £1 for a bound first folio in 1623. So we think the Durham copy had something like this pre-1840. Post-1840, we believe this is another book from our collection which was sent for rebinding at the same time, and we believe this is what the first folio looked like at the point of theft. So it's got this brown goat skin binding, kind of quite a hard pebble type grain to it. It's got 5 sewing supports and 2 full spans, a head and tail, clasps, which is kind of unusual for a printed book from this period. But yeah, this is what we think the last binding looked like. Okay, so a few more slides. This is a picture of Cousin's library. Sorry, Lauren, did you want to?
Oh, I just wanted to say that this is a picture of the room where the first folio was stolen. This is Cousin's library, yes.
Yeah, and this is where the book spent best part 400 years on the shelf. And this is where the exhibition is going to be held. We're bringing the first folio back to the library, and this space will be altered, and we'll have display cases in here and visitors coming to see the first folio. So we're really excited about that connection being restored. Okay, I'm going to skip through a couple here. So this is the current condition of the Durham First Folio. So yes, it's very sad. It's purely the text block left. The image on the left shows the 8 leaves at the front, which have been split along the spine fold. So got these 8 separated leaves. Beyond that, the text block is fairly sound. It's sound at the moment, but it won't stand up to much more use, we don't think. It's barely been handled since its return in 2008. But we think we can see evidence of it breaking up a little bit, despite that. The Tempest is the first intact leaf that is still part of the text block. But yeah, we've lost the boards, we've lost the leather on the spine. The right-hand image obviously shows you the spine, and you can see that the some of the flesh of the leather is still there. Yeah, this was forcibly ripped off of the binding. This didn't, this isn't aged. This hasn't just rotted away. This has been ripped away. And this is one of the reasons for wanting to preserve this. You can see the force, almost the violence that was applied to the act of destroying this binding. The other thing, which was a fairly recent discovery, I mentioned it earlier. So it's got 5 raised band supports, so 5 chord supports. And we assumed they were intact, that these had just been cut at the shoulder, but we had, in those sewing tunnels, effectively, we had 5 chords there. We discovered fairly early on that, in fact, only 2 chords remain, but it looks like all 5 are there. And the reason behind that is the sewing was so tightly packed, the sewing threads going around the chords basically formed a tunnel, which allowed the cord to be ripped out from inside that tunnel. Is that a good explanation, Lauren?
Yeah, without physically altering a book on screen to be able to describe it, I think that that's fairly accurate, yes.
Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to show, really, just to give you a sense of the condition of the First Folio at Durham at the moment. And I think what's been really interesting is when we've had First Folio experts, people like Greg Doran, who we mentioned earlier, and Emma Smith, when they've come to see the book, it's been quite quite an emotional reaction to seeing something that normally is displayed with beautiful binding, great reverence, to see something that's been attacked like this. That has an impact. And we felt that really inspired us to investigate that more deeply and what conservation would do to change that impact. People might travel to Durham to see this book because of its condition. Once it's in a lovely new binding, it'll look like other copies that you can go and see as well. So yeah, this for us was what made it unique.
It is worth saying that many First Folios are valued highly for the sort of interactive things that readers have done to it in the past. So whether they've doodled in the margins or, highlighted their favorite lines, that's how people interact with First Folios. And that's one of the main researcher interests for actually being able to access and read First Folios, is see those annotations. Our book is remarkably unmarked. It has a couple of annotations at the very beginning, individual letters that, as far as we know, don't have any specific meaning. A couple of graphite, marks here and there may have been added up until, the 1960s. And only maybe one sort of major annotation, which we have documented. So the importance of being able to open and look at the pages of our book is maybe not where the most interesting aspect of this book is, which sort of helped our decision making.
Great. Thank you very much for everything. And I'm glad that we had a chance to discuss many things today, competition, but besides competition as well. As I mentioned before, definitely would like to ask you many more questions, but we prefer to follow the format, and 90 minutes is already a lot. We had some really nice questions from the audience as well, and thank you very much for everybody for staying with us and for asking the questions. Or if you're watching this video in the future, thank you for watching anyway, and please check the link that leads to the competition page, and maybe you will decide to take part in this competition. That would be great. Or just visit the university and the library. That also would be great. The exhibition for the competition will happen in April 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, right.
I definitely want to go there, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe I will visit before, but it's a bit of a ride from Windsor. It's like something like 5-hour drive, I think. To Durham.
Take the train.
It's worth it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready to rely on British trains. After
Oh
living
no!
after living in France in the Netherlands, I'm not sure that the British trains are up to the task. But anyway, yeah, the people are saying things in the comments. Well, thank you for being with us. We'll stay for something like 30 seconds while the stream drops on Facebook and YouTube. But that's that for today. We have a couple more streams planned for June. Next week we have a rescheduled stream with a collector of miniature books. We'll see how from the US. We'll see how it goes. It was rescheduled once. I hope this time it will work out. And in 2 weeks we'll have Tom McEwen, a Scottish bookbinder, and he recently moved to a new studio, and we asked him to do a workshop tour, and of course we will discuss some of the bindings Tom made recently, or what he's working on now, or teaching, or just anything. It's always a pleasure to talk to Tom. So that's our plans for June. We have something scheduled for July as well, but I'll announce it later. Again, Laura and Tony, thanks a lot for spending time with us today. Thank you for being with us on Saturday. So,
Well, thank you so much for having us. And just as we're still talking to your audience, if you had any questions about the competition that haven't been answered either today or on the website, or questions come up as you're, deciding what to bind and what to enter, you're always welcome to get in touch with us. The conservation email is, Tony, I'm going to put you on the spot. It's ulc-conservation@durham.ac.uk.
Yes, I believe that's correct. Yeah, although if that doesn't work for any reason, there are email addresses on the Durham website. So if you go to Palace Green Library, there's a contact page there as well.
yeah, perfect.
So please do get in touch.
And the link to the competition is in the description of this video. So from there you can go elsewhere and find, emails, addresses, anything. So please use the link below.